Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. In previous episodes of Security Breach, we've discussed penetration testing, ethical hackers, cataloging connection points, and getting a handle on all those API connections. These strategies are centered on collecting data about possible vulnerabilities and developing defenses that reduce your attack surface, make attackers easier to spot, negate the dwell time of black hats looking to live inside your networks, and hopefully much more. While obtaining all this data is critical, the next challenge is understanding what to do with it and how to apply this information in forming a stronger cyber defense plan. This is where it gets tricky in the industrial sector. A lack of OT security expertise continues to permeate throughout the industrial sector. Throw in some cloudy and somewhat limited regulatory guidance, and knowing exactly what steps industrial cybersecurity leaders should take after getting all this data is even more complex. Our guest for this episode not only understands these dynamics, but confronts them on a daily basis. Before we talk to our guest for this episode, we're excited to announce that Security Breach is being sponsored by Rockwell Automation. For more information on their cybersecurity solutions, you can go to rockwellautomation.com. It's now my pleasure to welcome Brian Hoagley to Security Breach. He's a former CSO and cybersecurity leader for the Pentagon, as well as professor of cybersecurity at Boston College. He currently serves as the CEO of SideChannel, a cybersecurity services firm that offers risk assessments, virtual chief information security officers, and more. Brian, thanks so much for joining us today. I thought one of the places we could start is probably where you begin conversations with a lot of folks you talk to about cybersecurity, and that's just kind of going through a risk assessment and what it means, the type of data you can extract from it, because I think it's one of those things that we think we know what it is, but then we get involved and it's a lot more detailed than maybe what folks think. So kind of prefer your take on what we can take away from those risk assessments.
It's kind of a broad term, right? Because risk assessments is used and misused by people kind of across the board, and a lot of CISOs. I mean, I've even misused it. So the way that I characterize them are you looking at external threats, and that's like, risk assessments addressing threats or doing basically a threat assessment. So external actors, entities, or insider actors or entities that are a threat to you, right? Then threats are different than vulnerabilities. So the other kind of side of the risk equation, right, or a risk assessment is what a vulnerability assessment. So what do you already possess that you were trying to defend, things that you have in place that could be vulnerable or potentially vulnerable. So when you do a risk assessment, it needs to either cover one or each of these things or both of them. And what your job is to figure out, if we're going to take vulnerabilities first, what do I already have that I'm trying to protect? You need to figure out what your current state is. So I'm a big NIST guy. It's no secret. I'm a huge NIST cybersecurity framework fan. Wrote a book on it. I'm that much of a nerd on the standard. So what they've done is, like anything else, you've got a control framework or a standard or a set of controls, or whatever you want to call it, framework, standard, set of controls. These are the things that I should be doing, right? These are the aspects of what good, quote unquote, looks like. That represents a lot of what I have from a vulnerability or potential vulnerability standpoint. What do I already have that I'm trying to defend? What should I already have in place, right? If this represents what good looks like, then I should have all of these things in place, right? NIST CSF version 1.1 has 108 total controls. If you say, yep, I should apply to all of them, so I should have 108 things addressed. A risk assessment is going to go ahead and say, hey, from a current state, what do I currently look like? Which of those do I do, and which of those don't I do? So now that becomes your gaps. You've identified your gaps. If I'm saying I'm going to meet all 108 and only meeting 98, then those 10 controls become my gap, and that becomes part of a gap analysis. So your risk assessment is, what do I look like against a standard or a framework? What falls out of that I'm not doing falls into your list of gaps or risks, right? And then you do an analysis on those gaps to then determine, how do I want to address those to actually meet them on my path to a target state? So your target state is basically, what do I want to look like when I grow up, right? And eventually your target state should become your current state. Now that's your internal kind of looking from a vulnerability standpoint. Threat assessments are really looking at those things that are outside of your control, external entities, third parties, things that could be a threat to you, right? So you need to be able to do an assessment on those and then factor in, if those come to fruition, what is the likelihood of those coming to fruition? And if they do, what is the impact of those?
No, it seems like a great systematic approach in terms of identifying vulnerabilities and those threats along the way and understanding your total risk picture, I guess.
I'm going to worry a little less about external actors first. I'm going to make sure that what I have in place, I fully understand, right? I need to know my assets because I can't defend what I don't know exists. I need to know what I'm doing about those assets, how I'm protecting them, how I'm doing any detection in case anything happens to them, how I can respond if something is detected, how I can recover back to a known good state. I mean, these are the top 5 family controls for NIST, but like I would look inwards first. And then once I understand what I am, what I have, then I can worry about who's out there and who's out there to get me.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. Is there some things that you've uncovered in doing these risk assessments that are were either surprising or that you see over and over again in terms of being the biggest takeaways from going through that exercise?
Yeah, I just joked about it, but I mean, nobody does inventories first. I mean, the reason that CIS and ISO and NIST and even, when you look at other control frameworks, inventory of hardware and software, inventory of assets, inventory of data, classification of your data. Like nobody does that first. And yet those are the highest priority controls to address out of the gate. And the reason nobody does them is because they're the unsexiest thing in cybersecurity to have to go address, right? So people are like, I don't really want to do that. I want to go fight bad guys and look for, things on the wire and carve PCAP. And it's like, yeah, okay, settle down. But like, so it doesn't get the pizzazz. Like, I get it, but I can't build a house without an architectural diagram. Yeah. Right? I can't put the architecture into play unless I know the land that it's going to be put into. I can't build the house unless I know the materials. And yet everybody wants to jump into where are we going to put the sauna and the jacuzzi? So people miss the foundational elements. I'm just such a fan of the fundamentals, not because they're cool, and I talk about them probably more than I should, but because nobody talks about them. Nobody actually focuses on those things, and they address a significant amount of the types of risks that you'll eventually find, but then they also set the stage for your ability to actually do anything inside of a cybersecurity program. So one, your question was great because I see it a lot, and at this point in the game, I'm not shocked anymore that I keep seeing it. It's kind of comical. I try not to chuckle when clients tell me, their story, and it's like I already know how this is going to end. Like I know how this is going to go. But I'm glad you're talking about it and you're looking to start addressing this. Now you're looking to build a program.
Absolutely. No, I think everything you're talking about, I always bring up blocking and tackling, regardless of the application. And cybersecurity, it's that much more important. I think that one of the issues that really arises in the industrial sector, and I know you work with a lot of different customers, but we just don't have that in-house expertise, especially on the operational technology side. So when it comes to looking at cybersecurity and putting together something like a risk assessment or a cyber plan, it becomes very daunting and it's easy to get distracted. Let's talk about threat actors. Let's talk about vulnerabilities. Let's talk about all this other stuff. The blocking and tackling gets missed. What advice would you give in terms, I know that SideChannel is in a real unique perspective in terms of the services you offer and things like that, but if you're trying to either identify or develop this type of talent internally, what's some advice you could give, or maybe some of the characteristics you would look for?
I've seen 5,000, 10,000 person companies where they have one cyber person.
Wow.
Right? They've got a 100-person IT team, but they've got one cyber person in that whole team doing everything that you'd expect. That doesn't last long for that person. That's probably why I think you see a lot of turnover. Yeah. Right? So you got to really think about like, what's the team, if it even exists, that person's going to step onto. But the talent, and the skill set, do you have a defensive mindset, right? Can you think outside of being an auditor? I think that's a big one. We get a lot of really good, talented people who cannot unlock and get away from that pure auditor mindset of like, well, the policy says this, and if we're not doing it, then, it's we can't, and chasing around, risk registers and risk acceptance forms around an organization for people to sign off. like it merits nothing and it pushes paper, and that is not the right type of mindset when you think about risk management. You need to be able to operate in the gray. You need to be able to allow for trade-offs, right? Those good CISOs do that. Bad CISOs are the ones who say, well, the control says this, and I need you to do this, or I need a signature saying that we're accepting all the risk on it. It's like, no, man, like there's a maturity within a control, right? We can't, it's not an all or nothing.
Yeah.
And this sector and this industry is one thing I really do not like about my field, our field, is we have a lot of people that think that way. And that's not helping anybody.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I have to ask, in looking at some of those organizations, and I think I know what you're going to say already, but I think this is prominent in the industrial sector too, where you have an IT team, but you've got one individual focused on cybersecurity. What have you seen as a result, or how do those people react when they do get hit, when they do get hacked? What's their response like, or how does it lack, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, if they even understand, if they even understand what's going on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how close to boom, was that detection, right? Are they dealing with the ransomware event or the downtime on all those OT devices or ICS, whatever it is, as it's happening? Or did they detect it and they've been furiously working to keep that from happening, and unfortunately they just got behind the 8 ball on it?
Yeah.
It kind of depends on like how skilled is that person, how many managed, if you're the solo person, man, I really hope you've got managed services surrounding you, being able to help you execute on the other capabilities that you're expecting inside of an organization. If it's that one person and their expectation is to do all the MDR, all the email security, all the automation, all the detection and response, like that person is not 24/7. They go to sleep, they go on vacation, sometimes they get sick, so the fallout is it's never good. Like one, right? A breach is never good, right? Incidents are never good for anybody. But at the end of it, if you get that whole like pointing fingers, and like it's the one person who's sitting there going, wait, are you serious? Did you actually expect me by myself to do the work of 10 in this organization? Are you insane? Like,
yeah. Well, I bring it up. Yeah. I bring it up for a couple of reasons, because I knew where you're going to go with it, but it's an important point to reinforce, because I think due to the pandemic, there was all this investment in technology, and we didn't evolve cybersecurity along with all of that new technology, especially in the industrial sector. So I think there are a lot of enterprises who are in this situation. Maybe it's not one person, but it's certainly not potentially enough to handle a serious breach that takes place. And I think what that leads to is the easiest possible response. Pay the ransom, put a patch on the malware, whatever it is, as opposed to really digging in and finding what's going on within the system.
Yeah. I mean, response always comes down to, I believe, not the technical capabilities. Like you can hire you can call the digital janitors in to clean up. Like that's easy, right? Yeah. Like execute your cyber insurance if it's going to cover the claim, yeah. Right? Pay the money to get, to evict the bad guys. It comes down to culture inside of an organization on how you actually respond when you're post breach, right? You're sitting there at your most vulnerable moment going, I don't think we ever want to go through that again, right? I have gotten clients because they are at that moment going, yeah, we don't want to do that again. What should we have done in the first place? And then they go and seek answers. And those people, we've got clients who are like that. And it comes down to culture in the organization as to how do they realistically look at what just went down? Did they see this as we rolled the dice too many times and we got and it didn't work out this time? Or are they looking at it as if, all right, well, that was just a blip. Okay. We don't really need to change that much to make sure that doesn't happen again. It's like, no. Okay. Good luck. I have had that conversation with prospective clients who have come in and been like, oh, well, what do we need to do? I'm like, oh, well, without doing a full risk assessment of your organization and what you just went through and what led to that, based on what you're telling me, you probably are looking at this, and this inside of your future. And this is basically what it's looking like it's going to cost. I don't think we can do that. Good luck. Yeah. I literally don't want you as a client because you are a liability. because you will not actually execute and follow through on the advice I'm going to give you over the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's the culture. It's the, how is the organization realistically going to look in the mirror and say, okay, this is what we look like now, and this is what we're lacking. We didn't resource appropriately. We didn't update our application development processes on the apps that we're publishing. We didn't really look at our vendors. We didn't scrutinize them enough. We let the business make some really risky bets on accepting, potential losses, and we didn't really balance it against what the actual loss could be, and that's tough. We didn't find the right partner. We didn't, we went with the cheapest solution to protect us. We didn't go with the right solution to protect us. And, you see that with buyers, right? Not everybody's a gold buyer. Some people are silver and bronze buyers, and that's okay. But you need to be realistic and honest about what that trade-off is.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to pull 100 miles an hour safely in a Honda Civic. And I've seen some really great souped up Honda Civics, but you can't keep expecting a lot out of something that's lower quality. And I think people have some misunderstandings about realistically how far you can push certain things around IT when you're just trying to cut costs and go with the cheapest and go, okay, cool, we have enough. And then they're surprised when the bad thing really happens and overtakes their minimal investment.
Yeah. No, we see that way too much. I couldn't agree more. We've got this constant evolution with the cybersecurity sort of landscape or battlefield or however you want to look at it, attack surface. How are we doing in working with your customers? We're always going to be chasing the curve. We're never going to get ahead of it. It's moving too fast. The bad guys are always adjusting their tactics. How far behind are we? Are we keeping pace? What have you seen? Has it gotten better, or what's your takeaway right now in terms of how we're adjusting to these constant changes?
I don't know if I don't actually believe there are a lot of constant changes. Okay. And here's why. When you break down how attackers are operating, the way I look at them, one, we all have to recognize that they are operating as a business. There's an ROI for all of them, right? They are operating actually structured like businesses, right? Their people have healthcare. They go on vacation, right? They have benefits. They have P&L. They have quotas to hit. A lot of people don't understand that, and they diminish their adversary, and they don't realize that their business has an ROI. So if you can figure out, all right, if their ROI is a set formula, right, and a way to think about how they need to hit their P&L or increase their revenue, right? What do I need to do to diminish that, not diminish who the adversary is? The other piece to the equation, and why I think I don't believe it's this rapidly changing threat landscape that I think a lot of security marketing has created, is that deep down, when you look at everything that goes on with a ransomware, a business email compromise, or an insider threat, these are all the same old cons and criminal activity. They're just a slightly different format and shape. Right? Business email compromise is it starts from phishing and masquerading, as fraud, and it's a con, right? It's a lot of ransomware and attacks on applications and attacks on infrastructure, not ransomware, is smash and grab. It's opportunistic crime, right? Ransomware is extortion. The changes is the vehicle on how it got to you. Mm-hmm. But when you really look at what's happening, these are the same. It's the same old shtick. So when you think about how to combat that, right? That to me allows me to not worry so much about this ever increasing, world of threats that's happening around me. Coupled with these folks are operating like a business. So I take a very pragmatic approach to how do I address what's going on here? Okay. They have an objective, okay? And they have a couple means to be able to hit that objective. They have to con me. They have to smash and grab. They have to, whatever it is. And then if you do that, you slow down in figuring out how to put the right defensive measures in place. And once you do that, I think you can address a lot of the risks, right? If a lot of impact is from phishing, well, combat that area first. Stop the bleeding there, right?
Right.
A lot of people think, oh, we got to do all this stuff because of the ever-changing threat landscape. In reality, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff to do, but if you do these things, you're going to address 80% of that. So what are those, big bang for your buck moments, right? So for me, it's how do I look for detection and response capabilities on an identity, right? Because everybody's on a laptop at a Starbucks and wherever, BYOD, and identity is the new perimeter, right? Call it whatever you want. But like, how do I look for the identity? How do I look for things that are going on a device, on an endpoint? How do I look for, how do I protect our main communications channel? How do I protect our comms, which is everybody is email, right? And how do I just keep kind of in tune with what's going on out in the ether sphere? Kind of like, I read the news. Well, I read threat intelligence. How do I make sure that I'm not in a breach, right? And how can I kind of segment my entire network, my shop floor, my IT environment from my OT environment, my IT environment itself, so that I can kind of compartmentalize and stop the bleeding? I like those areas because it gives me the most coverage, right, of anything.
So kind of leads into my next question. Are there any threats, threat actors, new strategies, new vulnerabilities that you're uncovering or kind of on your radar right now?
The big push is going to be through, obviously, this growing surge of new SaaS platforms and third-party capabilities that larger organizations are going to start taking advantage of because of innovation or whatever else is pushing the creation of these tools, and some really great stuff that's going out there, right? I got some great clients that are like, wow, you guys build what? That's amazing, but they generally have weaker security, which means they're going to be a pivot point or an entry point for a bad guy or girl to then hopscotch into their actual target. So I see the supply chain space as being a blessing and a curse for corporate America over the next kind of 10 years. And I think that's where we're going to see, obviously, a big ramp up in adoption of third-party capabilities versus companies building it themselves. And then we're going to start seeing a lag, unfortunately, of the push to really vet the security of those capabilities before you allow them infrastructure access or data access to your organization. So I see that space over the next decade being the real space. Because I think most companies, when you peel back and talk to them, if they've invested anything in cyber, they have defended their own kingdom pretty well, right? Yeah. They've done that. Now they're extending their perimeter out, right? And they're starting to make those bets again. So how do we start protecting ourselves from the things that we're actually buying, right?
No, I think that's a great point. It's interesting. We're seeing that already in automotive. I mean, when you look at all of the different communication systems that are involved in a new car, and all of those are getting to be hackable. I mean, and that can lead right into, if you've got an Apple Play in your car, then you're looking at getting into a device that could lead to banking records. And like you said, it could go right down the line. It's very interesting to see how, especially in the manufacturing side, folks are going to start working with that. So.
Right. Yeah, the Bluetooth is going to be the undoing of most of us, I think.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, how loud and noisy it is. Like my phone right now is trying to connect to the guy who's on the other side of that wall in the office over there. Like the Bluetooth's just like, hey, I'm here. I'm trying to connect, right? Like, you ever run a Bluetooth scanner on a city street?
I bet.
It's just, it's just, it's insane because these things are just set to just, hey, I'm here. Am I supposed to connect with you? I'm here. I'm here. Like, all they do is just beacon until they connect with the thing that you approved to. It's only a matter of time until we get to the point where someone just figures out how to overcome that, right? Or that becomes an entry path where someone just finally goes, yeah, I'm actually the thing that you were supposed to connect to. Let me connect. Ding. Yeah. Right? It's like man-in-the-middle attacks, but in Bluetooth. So I see that. That's a tough one, right? And then just the data privacy aspect. I mean, cars are it, rental cars. How many times, and I do this every time now, every time I get into a rental car, I'm like, what's the old contact list already look like? Yep. Oh, yeah, look at this. It looks like there was a vice president of sales in the car who rented this before me. Interesting. Where did they go? Right? The amount of data we just freely leave around.
Yeah. Well, and that's why the phishing schemes continue to be so popular, because they can pick up all these little breadcrumbs that'll lead it to the bigger catch. So It's interesting.
It's
So
all
Brian, we could
ROI.
talk. What's that?
It's all ROI, right? Like
Yeah.
if it doesn't, if I don't have to go, like if I can pick up a lot of these little things for free or cheap and put them together to give me the big cash out, I'm going to do that, right? I mean, like look what they did
Yeah.
with the when some group, I don't know who they are, infiltrated the DoD's secure networks like 10 years ago. They just dropped USBs around GI bars in South Korea, and just basically the USB stick said free porn. What do you think a private
Well,
or
yeah,
sergeant's
yeah,
going to do? He's going to pick that up and be like, oh, plug it into the one computer that I have access to, which happens to be my DoD computer. Da da da. Like that was such a low cost entry point.
yeah.
Why wouldn't I do that? Why would I keep trying to break through the front door when I could just go in
Basically,
this
be
one?
let in. Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing happens I mean, if I wanted to break into an automotive line or a manufacturing facility, you know, I would find out where all those blue collar guys go drink after work.
Yeah.
They're like, hey man, here's a QR code. Check this out. Free access to whatever, free drinks. Just scan this code, with your phone, blah, blah, blah. Just, figure out where they live. In red teaming, there's a bit of a term, right? And we always used to scare folks with this, but like the CEO's kids are not off limits.
Yeah.
So, if if I wanted to break into like Tesla, and get like their code, I just figure out where all those guys like at one of their shops are a lot. And it's espionage, right? It's the human tactics to get into the technical stuff. That's that's actually the lower cost than trying to break in through whatever firewall and structured system that they've spent a gazillion dollars on, but they haven't protected the people. I worry more about people being on that way than clicking on a phishing link.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it takes more education, more training to be able to spot those things and to adjust behaviors that you really haven't thought about before as potentially being risky. Absolutely.
And no one's training for it.
Yeah.
Like I have yet to see a corporate security training program centered around anything around personal OPSEC or personal security, just out and about.
Yeah.
DoD was. I keep going back to DoD because I was there. There was. We used to see guys all the time with the tags, right? Like your badges and everything, and they'd be like walking around in public with these things like out. I mean, it's almost kind of like Hollywood. Like you could go if you wanted to get into a manufacturing space. You just I can just easily take a picture of everyone's wearing their tags and their access, and like how hard is it for me to get that off of somebody after 12 rounds of tequila on a Friday night. Seriously, it doesn't take a lot to overcome a person. Like it doesn't require force. You just need to find the people that are susceptible.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and it kind of leads into a topic we bring that comes up a lot on Security Breach, where we talk about the human element. You mentioned it sort of earlier on, but from a training perspective, we're sort of in this weird spot where we want to educate people. We want them to do the right thing. We don't want to vilify them when they do something wrong. We don't want to terrify them about all the possible threats out there, but we need to expose them to all this stuff. So what is that line that we can walk in terms of educating, but making people feel confident, and also not making sure they're not afraid to say, you know what, I may have screwed up and opened an email that I really shouldn't have. How do we do that?
Yeah. So one, you cannot make any type of training you're doing punitive in any way. It does not work. Like they have done studies, like, and I have seen it in corporate and in the government. You cannot have a punitive element to any of the training you're doing. And I don't know why I see some products out there that do that, right? It'll be like, or CISOs that'll pull together like reports and then just talk about like, oh, hey, Bob's our guy. And you're like, you are not going to change Bob's behavior by constantly putting him. He doesn't get paid enough to care about that from you. Like you can't think about that punitive element. The other piece is, and I don't know why we do this, but like, it takes like 6 to 8 months to take like a trait to become a human behavior. So why are we still doing annual training and expecting people to know what the heck they just went through 30 minutes after that, let alone 365 days later, or over the course of the next 365 days, expect that half-hour training change their behavior. It doesn't work. Psychology will tell you 6 to 8 months. So adopting some type of training that in smaller digestible bites reinforces the concepts continuously and over time, right? Because again, if I have to, if you know, and you and I are in this profession, yet if someone came to us and said, we need you to take this 1 hour security awareness training, we would both roll our eyes and we'd be like, I don't really want to do that. And that wouldn't even just be us coming from like, oh, I already know it. Not that aspect. Our human reaction to having to sit down and do that is just going to be the first thing, not the cybersecurity expert part of us.
Yeah.
So why do we expect people who don't have our experience willingly to sit down and then actually retain any of that information? It doesn't work. So we need to figure out how to adopt better ways to reinforce things in bite-sized chunks over time, not be punitive in any way, and actually be able to create the carrot for everyone. Hey, you know, if you report something, you win something, right? We need to stop kind of thinking that we're going to get it all done as adults in the company we work at today. The reality is a lot of training needs to think about, what am I going to do for this person for the next job that they're going to have? And we actually need to start kind of doing more of this training sooner in our life. Think about this. You and I went through K through 12 and then college, right? Like, think about how long it took you to learn math and like just how to like learn English and like learn writing and learn. K through 12 developed us on that, right? Yep. We're not going to develop an adult with already preconceived notions and behaviors and learned traits by doing something for an hour once a year in a field that they are not in and they can realistically don't care about.
Yeah.
You know? So look, I'm not trying to paint this grim picture, but I'm also not going to say like this is a solvable problem that can be done with like that product with, you know, running this type of a program as part of HR at this one company and you're all good to go. Like, you have to play the long game with training, because training, it's not training, it's education, right? Yeah. And that takes a while to instill.
We've talked a lot about a ton of challenges here, Brian. Let's talk about some of the things that maybe Side Channel is doing to help support a lot of these different initiatives that are going on in cybersecurity.
Sure. So I built a company 4 or 5 years ago, because as a CISO for a Fortune 500, looking at my vendors who were predominantly smaller mid-market companies, I didn't ever see somebody like me in them. And that was a real problem, right? I'm like, wow, I'm giving you a lot of access to my infrastructure or my data, and yet there's not anybody at the helm of your cybersecurity program. That's concerning. And, you know, back then it was very, hey, well, that's your problem to go solve. Like, I'm the CISO over here at this Fortune 500, right? Yeah. Go solve the thing. Go solve your own problem, vendor. And I never really kind of got into it until, you know, kind of the last kind of year or so. And I dug in and it was like, wow, you don't even know what to do. You don't know who you're supposed to hire. You don't have the right direction. In fact, I had a lot of vendors asking me what they should be doing. I was like, oh, this seems like a business opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it became. And we launched the company to focus on mid-market organizations and startups and really not address the enterprise. Like, you already have somebody like me. You can figure it out, right? There's only 2,000 companies in the Fortune 2000, right? There's 9 million companies in the United States. So who's helping everybody outside the Fortune 2000? And when I looked at who was or who should have been, you know, when I look at the bigger VARs, right, and what I now consider my competition are people who are kind of in that space, although I don't think they're very competitive, they weren't really addressing what was needed. So I was like, yeah, okay, how do I fractionalize me, right? How do I take, and you can't, you know, scaling people's hard, but it's doable. And I think I've proved it over the last couple of years. So how do I fractionalize former chief information security officers from enterprises who want to do this type of work, people who don't want to run their own consulting company, but still want to keep doing this job? How do I do that? And, you know, we built out some technologies. We built out Real CISO as a platform to allow us to do risk assessments, really scale people to be able to quickly do this, because no one wants to do a risk assessment. And we started off our conversation talking about them. Nobody actually wants to do those. Everybody wants the outcome from those, right? True. So how do you quickly go through the process? Get me to the outcome. I want to know what it is I'm supposed to work on. That's what I want out of the risk assessment. I don't want to go through this process. God, no. Nobody does. As a practitioner who makes his money at doing it, I don't want to do that. Okay. That's why we built a SaaS platform. So you scale people that way, right? You build a toolbox of capabilities that you can basically just kind of walk in and be like, listen, I already kind of know what you need, because you're a 500-person organization inside of the manufacturing sector in the United States. I know what regulations you're underneath you need to meet. You've already told me kind of through scoping kind of what you do or don't have. I can tell you, based on the other 10 clients I have that look just like you, this is your first 30, 60, 90 days. Here's the technologies you're going to need to go address certain aspects of your risks and your environment. Let's roll those out. Because again, you don't want to go through an RFP process. You don't want to go through a bake-off. You don't want to go through POCs to figure out the perfect solution. You want the outcome, which is, we have a cyber program. We are now more secure. So SideChannel's whole focus has been, get to that point. Why can't I deliver to you on day one what most people will tell you by day 90? And that's been phenomenal for us and our clients and what we're doing.
With your experience working with the DoD, Brian, I was hoping maybe you could comment a little bit on the national cybersecurity strategy that's being formulated and sort of put out in chunks. It seems like a lot of it is suggestions, and we need to put together strategies as opposed to real hard guidelines. But I'd still like to kind of get your perspective on the impact it could play for especially manufacturing.
So the executive order that came out, I think, focused more on like water and wastewater versus actually like manufacturing, right? Yeah. Which is odd. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I am very thankful that when I turn my faucet on, like, it's clean water at my house, right? And when I flush my toilet, it leaves my house. Like, that's important. Like, everybody in civil society needs to respect and understand that. And the AWWA, which is the Water and Wastewater Association, and the EPA and what they're supporting to put cyber initiatives into that space are good. I'm glad the EO came out with it. But yeah, it is interesting that there is kind of this patchwork, right, of what's going on. And plus, on top of, you've got an executive order, and that's a very, everybody should do these things. Now go figure it out. It's like, damn it, man. Like,
right.
Take the next step. Tell everybody, like, this is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's compounded, I think, by the fact that we don't have very good central authority from a federal state or from a federal stance on national standards for cybersecurity, right? NIST came out with, here's all the good stuff, but no one has said, that's what we have to do, right? It's still up to states, which is good, but not great. And then you've got the agencies, like, for manufacturing, if you say you build things, half your revenue is DoD and half your revenue is not. Do you take most of your leadership and everything from the DoD, not DoD? The stuff that you're building for DoD, should you apply those same regiments and requirements to the rest of your shop floor and capabilities? Is what they're saying what good looks like, and does that apply to everything? Like, there's no balance. I don't think CISA is doing enough with what they're charged with. I think Jen Easterly is on the right track. I think the administration is on the right track with what needs to happen there. But geez, I mean, just look at what they put out for, how to deal with ransomware. And it's like, you try to navigate through that website. No small business owner is effectively going to navigate through that website and come out of that going, oh, I know what to go do. Like, it seems like, this seemed like a good idea on paper. And then when they put it together and put it out, it was like, okay, you guys missed the mark. Like, people need clear, decisive action to go take. Like, go do these things.
Yep.
They also need you to go, and this is how you do it. Right? We miss that second part. Like, for some reason, the government fails to want to be prescriptive on that second aspect. For whatever reasons, whether it's, I think in DoD, it was always, well, we can't tell people how to go do things because then we're showing favoritism, right? And again, I can tell you, 4 or 5 years now working with mid-market, they don't care. They want somebody to tell them that, I don't know how to solve the problem. Please tell me what to go do. Like, if I buy this product and do these things, like, I will be better off. No
Yeah.
one's telling me it's going to be perfect. No one is assuring me that what I am going to put in based on those recommendations will stop all things, but it will help a heck of a lot. So we have this very like, you should go do this stuff, but good luck, go do it, figure it out yourself. But then you don't have the experts out there to go actually follow through and actually make that happen. You're still sitting it with people who generally don't even understand IT.
It feels to me like the government is terrified of this as a problem because they're afraid of maybe putting out information that, like you said, doesn't work for everybody. And then someone's going to come back and say, well, you told me to do this and I didn't quite get the perfect result. Well, that's never going to happen. We understand that, but that's the way bureaucrats can think it from time to time. Do you think industry can come together, be a little bit more transparent about some of the things we're experiencing, share some of that stuff so that we can collectively come together with best practices ourselves, maybe without as much government intervention? Is that a possibility, or are we too different?
I think we've already tried that, right? Look at what CIS did with their controls, right? They nonprofit organization pulled together the brightest minds, different industries, pulled together and did some stuff, right? Said, hey, here are the things to go do.
Yeah.
How well adopted is that? I mean, like, I talked to these guys. We're partners with them. Like, they do great things. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, it's not like everybody's lining up to go execute on all of those controls.
Yeah.
Right. So part of the problem is because we are inside of capitalism, right? You've got right. CrowdStrike and SentinelOne are never going to get together and say, here's what we've seen from an endpoint standpoint, component that we want to bring together and help improve the world. They're never going to do that. It's not in each of their economic interests for that to happen. Their economic interests lie in, we know what's going on and those guys don't. By us. And that's how a lot of products, go about. There are a ton of smart people that work at these organizations that in back channels that like I'm in, right, where we all talk about this stuff independent of who, signs our paycheck. Right. And this is the conversation that goes on. How should we address these things? What should go on? Getting these working groups. But it's not coming out and hitting the world and being meaningful in its use. And that's a real problem. I think that's where I believe government does a good job of being able to step in and go, okay, cool. Thanks, guys, for all the insight, for all the SMEs we pulled in on this, committee or working group or whatever. Thank you for all the thought leadership. Hate that term. Now the government's going to head and because most people aren't either. That's why I hate that term.
I get it.
And then the government comes in and says, cool, we talked to the experts. Here's what everybody needs to go do. We deciphered it. Boom. This is the approach now. Because I wouldn't leave it up to any one industry. Because the second you actually do it too, their competition is going to come out and be like, well, why would you? Our marketing says they're wrong.
Yeah. No. Good point. It's going to be interesting to see how it kind of falls down or how it all shakes out. And it's interesting because the government is focused right now on those critical infrastructure, the utilities, hospitals, things like that, and developing or morphing some of those thoughts into the private sector. When you're looking at a cookie manufacturer with 50 people on a line, it is going to be different, but we need to be able to figure out a way to scale some of those processes.
Well, that's what regulation is. So look at what New York State did with Department of Financial Services Part 500, right? They adopted NIST's cybersecurity framework. They implemented a regulation, and they differentiated covered entities, companies that exist inside of New York State that fall underneath DFS rules. They differentiated based on size and asset size. So they could say, hey, this regulation applies. But if you're a small entity, this part of the regulation applies to you. If you're a large entity, all the regulation applies to you. That's how regulation is supposed to work, right? But it requires government to actually continue to think that way, but take feedback from the industry, because New York State didn't create their regulation, which I think is probably one of the best regulations the United States has ever put out, right? And it was done by a financial services group within the single state of New York, not the federal government. To me, that's the way to go do this. Is New York didn't come up with that themselves. They looked at NAIC, industry experts, CISOs and leaders inside of financial services and insurance and said, what should this look like? If we're going to hold you to a standard, what should this look like?
Yeah.
And we all gave our input. And that's what shaped that regulation. And it's really good.
So, Brian, this has been awesome. I appreciate your sort of brutal honesty in some of these fronts.
Just how I am.
No, absolutely. No, it's been great. Just kind of wrapping things up here, looking forward maybe 12, 18 months, what do you think are some of the biggest trends that are going to impact cybersecurity?
I think the push and the view on identity is going to be it, right? I think, from a sector by sector standpoint, there's been so much of a push on the endpoint, and that's great. I'm not saying it's a swing to do this and not that. It's now you also have to do this. Yeah. So really focusing on that identity is going to be huge. And then that supply chain. I mean, the extension and the continued use, that is going to be a growing area. And then I think, kind of farther out, there's going to be this big pendulum swing back on the cloud service providers. I think there's going to be a real push either by them themselves. They're going to wake up and they've got to acknowledge this themselves, that they kind of keep getting blamed or expected to be doing certain things for people. Like, I've heard this from plenty of folks. Like, hey, I thought AWS was doing that for me. It's like, no. Yep. I think eventually AWS is going to do that for you, right? Like eventually the CSPs are just going to step in and be like, you know what? None of you can seem to do this well. So we're going to do this for all of you now, right? And now, boom, here's that security. And it's on by default, right? There's just going to be this more and more of a push because I think the CSPs are going to, if they keep dealing with this kind of blowback on cloud insecurity, kind of that view, which I don't think is true. It's people just incorrectly using it.
Yep.
They're going to kind of use it as too much noise and just say, how much does it cost to just make this just shut up and just do this for everyone and just shut it down? And I think there's going to be a real push inside of that space. Maybe that's super wishful thinking. I really want that to happen because I think they're in a very, very good position to see that data and be able to actually make the right changes across the board to make this impactful. And that's just going to raise the bar for everybody, right? So I think those three areas, right? Identity, supply chain, and CSPs taking a little bit more ownership on security for their clients and their clients' clients.
Thanks, Brian. And for more information on the work he and his colleagues are doing, you can check him out at sidechannel.com. Thanks for joining us today. And to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Brian Hoagley, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.